Everything that the New Orleans Saints need to do to get a win on Monday night against the Carolina Panthers is already in their DNA. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much, as always, to all you everydayers out there making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget you can subscribe and follow always for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss the latest episodes. And if you want more, including our exclusive film studies, Q&As, early access, and much more, you can become a Locked On Saints insider by heading over to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSaints today to join a community I would love for you to be a part of. As always, I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson NOLA on your favorite social media, your New Orleans Saints expert, credentialed member of the Media Saints News Network, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday, and then some on Locked On Saints. In today's episode of Locked On Saints, brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Head over to the Game Time app, create an account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. On today's episode of Locked On Saints, it is the game plan. This is what we do every single Friday, breaking down the matchup that's upcoming for the New Orleans Saints in that week. Yes, we're going to get an extra Monday episode. Don't worry. We're going to spend the Monday morning episode with a little bit of get to know the Carolina Panthers and, of course, keeping you up to date with everything going on with the New Orleans Saints. You know, we're not going to stop there, though. There's so much more here on Locked On. So let's go ahead and take a look at how to manage Bryce Young. We're also going to go through three things that the Saints offense must do with a little bit of help from Derek Carr. And before we get to any of that, we're going to start off with the bread and butter concepts that can win the New Orleans Saints this game against the Carolina Panthers. The things that will beat the Carolina Panthers are the things that you have watched the New Orleans Saints do since Temperature by Sean Paul was the number 2 song in the country, since High School Musical was the best album in the country, since The Roots, Game Theory was the best hip-hop album that year, since 2006, everybody, in case you're wondering. These are things that the New Orleans Saints have been doing for a long time. So let's break it down. Here's the deal, right? The Carolina Panthers played 74% of their defensive snaps last week against the Atlanta Falcons in cover 3. Cover 3 is a middle of field closed defense that's zone all across, which means you're not manned up guarding somebody just to be guarding somebody. You have an area of the field for which you're responsible. Your eyes are in the backfield and the quarterback, and there's 3 deep defensive backs. And it's called middle of field closed because one of those 3 defensive backs is in the middle, literally in the middle of the field. So if there's 2 guys splitting or 4 guys splitting the field, middle of the field is open that way. If there's 3 guys or 1 guy deep, then the middle of the field is closed. That's what they played a ton of last week. Now, I doubt that they'll make that same mistake going up against the New Orleans Saints to that degree here in, the game will be in Carolina. But if they continue to show cover 3 against this New Orleans Saints passing attack, you're going to love what I'm about to say. Because here are the things that you can utilize in this New Orleans Saints offense that will beat cover 3. Let's start off with the seam route. Yes, the seam route, it's back. It's back. We've already seen it. We've already seen the seam. We watched it all preseason. Juwan Johnson, Foster Moreau, so on and so forth. Lucas Krull. We've watched the New Orleans Saints implement this back into their offense big time. Basically, what you're trying to do there is that you're running some route over on the outside that pairs with that seam route. Sometimes maybe it's a hitch where you kind of push 12, 15 yards downfield and then turn back out coming back towards the line of scrimmage. Meanwhile, that seam route's just running right up the seam, which is kind of that area in between the hash marks and the numbers. All you have to do is watch the outside defender. If the outside defender takes the hitch, you throw to the seam. If the over-the-top defender takes that seam, you're probably going to get the hitch over on the outside shoulder. So there's going to be different things for you to watch there in terms of how the Saints put defenders in conflict, especially when it comes to those 3 deep safeties, and then there's going to, or 3 deep defensive backs, and then 4 underneath usually defenders as well, which sometimes leaves the middle of the field open. That's where plays like 4 verts come in or all go special. All Go Special. Long time staple in the New Orleans Saints playbook. They tend to run it in a 3-by-1 formation, meaning that there's 3 receivers on one side, 1 receiver on the other. The inside most receiver in that 3 receiver set crosses the field, because what you're doing is you're trying to hit landmarks. You want an outside the numbers on the left side and outside the numbers on the right side. You want a seam on the left side. You want a seam on the right side. And so you're carrying one of those guys over to the seam on the left side, which means they also cross the middle of the field. So you might find some of that space right there in the hole behind the linebackers. Otherwise, you're watching the deep safety in the middle of the field. Does the deep safety in the middle of the field take the right seam on the offensive side? Then you throw to the left seam. Does that middle of the field defender take the left seam on the offensive side? Then you throw it to the right seam. Or you wait and watch to see if one of the outside guys wins, which is also very possible. These are staples in the New Orleans Saints philosophy. You could also run what are called smash concepts. We saw the Saints win with a version of this just last week in their opening drives, the 22-yard throw from Derek Carr to Rashid Shaheed, where Rashid Shaheed was kind of running this corner route toward this right sideline. Underneath him was a flat route that was kind of being run by Juwan Johnson. That puts this outside defender that's caught in the middle in conflict. Do they take too much depth to cover the corner route? If so, throw to the hitch, or you throw to the outside in the flat. Juwan Johnson's got some room to turn up field and run. If that linebacker or if that defender crashes down on that flat route, which is exactly what happened, you go over the top to Rashid Shaheed or whoever's running that corner route, but just put it a little bit further upfield so that he's got to work back to it and doesn't run into the safety over the top. You run a similar concept to that called a smash concept. So instead of that, it's the same corner route over the top from the inside receiver, but instead of that receiver that's going out into the flats running just sort of out into the flat, you're running a hitch or a comeback, whatever it is that you want to look at there. A couple of other things that the Saints, or that one other thing that the Saints can do is run out of a trips formation. You've seen the Saints do this a lot. The triangle reads, where you see, 3 receivers kind of bunched together in a triangle formation. You run one of them with a corner route. You run one of them going towards the outside. You run the other one with an arrow route on the inside. That arrow route on the inside becomes your first read. And then after that, you're just watching to see, what does the inside out defender do? Does he crash inside? Then you go to the outside route. Does he go outside? Then you pass to the inside route. These are all things we watch the New Orleans Saints do on a weekly basis for a very, very long time. So this should all be very familiar to them. The Carolina Panthers did shift to cover 1 on 3rd down, sometimes on 3rd and 10 or longer in particular, or 3rd and within 10 in particular. So that would be a lot of man coverage, crossing routes, zones, over routes, all those other things. Again, staples for the New Orleans Saints offense. So you see a lot of man coverage there on those 3rd downs within 10 yards. They then switched to cover 3, or cover 6 rather, which is kind of a blend of cover 4 on one side, cover 2 on the other side. That's still 3 deep defenders. It's just that instead of them being responsible for a third of the field each, like a cover 3 look, 2 of them are responsible for half the field on one side, and then 1 is responsible for the other half the field on the other side. So a lot of the same cover 3 attacks that we just went over would impact cover 6 coverage as well. They tend to run that on 2nd and 3rd and long, so 7 and more and things like that. So if the New Orleans Saints want to beat the Carolina Panthers, these are some of the concepts that they can run, and each and every one of these are things that they're very, very familiar with and very, very comfortable with. So if the New Orleans Saints want to beat the Carolina Panthers, all they have to do is stick to their bread and their butter. But there's 3 other things that the New Orleans Saints must get done over on the offensive side, and yes, it all starts with protection up front. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. So you don't have your tickets, and maybe you're in Charlotte or in the North Carolina area and you want to go and check out the New Orleans Saints against the Carolina Panthers, well, Game Time is the way to do it. You ain't got to worry about it. But Ross, I didn't plan months in advance, and I didn't go and buy my tickets before the season started. Ain't no thing. Go over to the Game Time app today, because they've got deals all the way up to the day of the game, and really the day of the event. Maybe it's a concert you want to go to, comedy, theater, whatever it is that you're looking for, Game Time has you covered. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to go and download the Game Time app, because you're going to be able to get your tickets without all that stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, then use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL, all one word. You're going to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. We broke down some of the concepts that the Saints can use over on the offensive side that they were already very familiar with to be able to attack what this Carolina Panthers defense might look like. We can't expect everything to translate week over week. So just because they ran cover 3 that much against Atlanta doesn't mean they're going to run it that much against New Orleans. But whenever they do, you got to be able to take advantage of it, especially when you know the concepts that can attack it. Speaking of things that we know, right, when it comes to the New Orleans Saints, here are 3 things that we know that they must get right over on offense. Appreciate all you everydayers out there making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day, every day. So we know that this all starts up front for the New Orleans Saints this week, right? Like we know that, right? And that's not me being overly critical. That's not me being unfair. Like, that's just the situation, right? So for New Orleans, they gave up a ton of pressure in that game against the Tennessee Titans. And yes, I know the Tennessee Titans front is really, really good, but the Saints have got to improve up front. And you're about to go up against another front that's really, really good. Guys like Brian Burns, who, yes, was kind of looking at holding out at the beginning of the season, but ain't holding out no mo. He already said, I'm not missing any games. So he just gave up pretty much all of his leverage in terms of that negotiation. Derek Brown was tossing Chris Lindstrom around like a rag doll all day in their game last week. We've also got Frankie Louvu over on the outside that you have to be concerned about and that we should be talking about as well. So there's a lot of places where this Carolina Panthers front can generate some pressure. And so the Saints are going to have to be able to combat that. And really what that comes down to is this offensive line getting comfortable. Trevor Penning, James Hurst, these guys have not been starters for the New Orleans Saints at the positions that they're playing, at least in James Hurst's case. He's moved around a whole bunch. He started at left tackle last year. Trevor Penning only had 1 start last year, just got his first start this year. The 64 snaps that this offensive line, with those 2 guys, Eric McCoy, Cesar Ruiz, Ryan Ramczyk, played last week, are the first 64 snaps they've ever taken together. Period. That's it, right? So now what you're looking at is, okay, can they take the steps forward? I have a lot of confidence that they will. I understand why the New Orleans Saints are not jumping to the drastic decision of, oh my God, 1 game, we have to replace Trevor Penning entirely. I get it. I get why you don't do that, because that would be a bad decision. But I think a lot of it also comes down to how can the quarterback help them out? What we have seen a lot against Carolina is the Saints not be able to understand where pressure is coming from, diagnose where the pressure is coming from, do that pre-snap read. Derek Carr should be able to do that at a higher level. Now, we watched Carolina not run many stunts last week. Not a ton of that, not a ton of gamesmanship on the defensive line, just straight up trying to get after the quarterback. And in some cases, against Desmond Ridder and the Atlanta Falcons, that worked. In other cases, it didn't. I expect that defensive front will be a little bit more creative this week. So the New Orleans Saints will have to be prepared for that. So just how confident is Derek Carr that protection is going to continue to take steps forward with live game reps? Here's what he had to say.
Very confident, yeah. That happens a lot in week 1, too. It's live bullets, a lot of new games, especially that front. That front is amazing. We got another really good front here. So my mindset has always, Coach Gruden always told me, he is like, look, I don't care whatever happens in front of you, relatively, you just try and find a way, your best way to try and move the ball down the field. And, sometimes he would help me. Sometimes I understand there's nothing you can do, but just keep that mindset and that mentality that you're always going to try and move the ball no matter what happens. But my mindset, no matter what, like if I get hit, don't get hit, whatever, like I'm just playing football. And I'm always just trying to move the ball. And I try and keep that mindset to where I don't even care. It's going great. It's not, that's okay, But my confidence level is always high in our guys, especially with the talent we have in that room and the things I've seen them do all offseason.
That's a really kind look at sort of the confidence and things like that from Derek Carr. But it's a good thing, right? Like Derek Carr doesn't have to answer the question that way. And I get the idea that, oh, well, he's not going to say anything bad about his offensive line and stuff like that. There's some truth to that. But he also doesn't have to say anything overly good about the offensive line either. But notice that he didn't really put it all on the offensive line. He put it on himself. That like no matter how the offensive line is performing, he has to be able to move the ball and the offense has to be able to move. So he doesn't really care about, to an extent, as he mentioned, what's actually going on in front of him. He's just here to try to make the plays nonetheless. And we kind of saw him do that, right? He was under pressure for, I think it was 17, 18 different dropbacks. I think it was 17 of his dropbacks against the Tennessee Titans. Threw the ball, 13 times, had one of those batted at the line of scrimmage, was sacked 4 times, but of his 13 throws, including that batted pass at the line of scrimmage, he completed 8 passes for over 160 yards. Didn't throw an interception. He threw his interception when he was clean, actually, in that 2-minute drill at the end of the first quarter, first half, where he got a little happy. But if you're looking for the New Orleans Saints to take steps forward on the offensive line, it's not just about the offensive line. It's going to be about Derek Carr and this New Orleans Saints offense helping them out, getting the ball out quickly, all these other things. But game reps definitely will make a big difference, and I think you got a little bit of that explanation there from Derek Carr as to why. The next piece, which kind of goes hand in hand with the offensive line and helps on the pass protection side, is actually running the ball. Well, Ross, how does that help on the offensive side or on the passing side? Well, if you have a run game that a defense has to take seriously instead of one that's rushing for 2.6 yards per carry, then all of a sudden those defensive linemen don't get the option to assume that you're a one-dimensional team, pin their ears back and come after your quarterback the way that, an Arden Key was able to at the end of the first half, where he was just after Derek Carr constantly because the Saints were clearly not running the ball in that 2-minute situation. So I think that those are going to be the next kind of steps for them, is not only can the offensive line get better, which it should over the course of those game reps, getting experience, getting comfortable, all those other things, but also helping out that pass protection with having a run game. Maybe Kendre Miller's back on Monday. That should help a bit so that you're not, kind of one-dimensional even in your run game in a way, even though Jamaal Williams isn't one-dimensional, but it's always good to have that sort of those change of pace guys that can come in more than just 25% of the time. How much more can you get them out there? How much more do you lean on Taysom Hill for your run game? Like Taysom Hill in prime time, let's get it. Like this is the time to do all that. So there's a lot of ways to kind of be able to take advantage of that. And then of course, play action becomes more effective. No matter what, play action works. Don't let them fool you. Don't listen to when they tell you that play action doesn't work if your run game doesn't work. It does, but it does work better when your run game is also working. And finally, screens. Screen passes. If you're going to want to take advantage of an aggressive defensive front, one of the ways that you're going to be able to do that is with screens. Get them behind the play. Get them left behind. That way they get a little bit more concerned about over pursuing. Then you start to change the tendency, right? You throw the screen on the outside to Rashid Shaheed as Foster Moreau cuts underneath to block downfield. But then the next, couple of times after you show that look, maybe that defense doesn't come for you the way that they were coming for you before. And you're prepared for that because instead of having Foster Moreau block downfield, he's just releasing and heading upfield. Then all of a sudden you've got a little bit of a deep shot to try there against the or with the tight end or elsewhere. So there's these little pieces that you can do in terms of being a little bit more creative in that screen game that kind of partner in with the play action part, because then they have to take everything very seriously and they have to be able to sit back and watch things develop and react, as opposed to just predetermined knowing, hey, I'm trying to get after this quarterback because they're clearly in a 7-step drop situation right now with their run game not working. If the Saints do those 3 things, things get a little bit easier for them over on the offensive side, but nothing gets easy unless they're able to neutralize the Carolina Panthers offense in the way that they were neutralized last week. How do they do that? That's what we got coming up for you as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is sponsored by BetterHelp Therapy Online. BetterHelp is the place to go if you're looking to try out therapy, but don't have the schedule, or maybe you live in a high traffic area or something like that. It's where you don't have the opportunity to go and do in-person sessions and things like that. Or maybe you just don't want to. Like, let's just be real. Like, at some point, you just don't want to do that. You want to be able to do things in the comfort of your own home, where you're comfortable, where things are good, where you're safe, all that. That makes perfect sense. BetterHelp is the place to go when you're looking for that. It's more affordable than traditional therapy. It's less of a time commitment, and you got options. You can do phone calls, you can do video calls, you can do text conversations. There's so many things at your disposal, and they'll pair you up with a therapist based on your questionnaire, and it's free to change if that therapist doesn't work out. So get a break from your thoughts with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Today's episode of Locked On Saints also brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks, the easiest and most fun way to play daily fantasy sports. I ain't got no time for these season-long redraft leagues and these dynasty leagues and all this. I ain't got no time for that, and I know you might not either. That's why I love Prize Picks. Prize Picks is super easy because it's you versus the house. It's you versus some projections. So if you know that the New Orleans Saints defense is going to be really good, maybe you're going to take the less on Bryce Young's 184.5 passing yards in this game. Maybe you're feeling really confident about Chris Olave, again, so you might take the more on his passing yards. There's so many different ways for you to do it, but it's super, super easy, and you can win up to 25 times your initial entry. It is super dope. Go and check them out today. It's our friends. prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use the promo code LockedOnNFL in all caps for a first deposit match up to $100. Put $100 down, you get $100. You got $200 now. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints. Now flipping over to the defensive side. We're speaking a lot about the offense here, because the offense kind of had the most to fix, right? Like, you feel confident about the New Orleans Saints defense, but they've got some things that they could improve upon and will need to improve upon going into this game against the Carolina Panthers on Monday night as well. As always, I appreciate all you everydayers out there making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day. Every day, make sure you're checking out the NFL Kickoff live show later on today, getting a bunch of news. And of course, your boy's going to be making an appearance, my Jackson 5 that I do there every week, bringing that heat. So how do the New Orleans Saints manage rookie quarterback Bryce Young? Yes. Have they struggled against mobile quarterbacks in the past? Yes. Have they struggled against rookie quarterbacks in the past? A ton. How do you manage and curb all of that? So the first thing for me when it comes to Bryce Young, 3 words, and they're all the same. Disguise, disguise, disguise. I know, not very creative on my part, but that is a big thing for this. Show Bryce Young 3 safeties on the field and dime sets and nickel sets with 2 safeties high that rotate down, or 1 safety high that rotates up, Okie fronts with 3 defensive linemen, 2 linebackers sugaring the A gaps, and then a couple of safeties on the outside. Who's coming, who's going, who's dropping, who's staying, all those other things. You have to be able to get his mind working big time right up front, right? And save a little bit. That way you're maybe like building some tendencies early, and then you're changing some tendencies late, keep him on his toes, all those other things. But with any rookie quarterback, regardless of how good they are, how smart they are, the program they played in, the programs that they played against, like Bryce Young has seen a lot working with Nick Saban and Alabama and against SEC defenses. I get it, but you can still show him something that he hasn't seen before, because this is only his second game in his entire NFL career. So this is the opportunity to be able to do that. Like, when these 2 teams meet again later on in the season, we're probably not having this conversation the same way, right? Like, he's seen a lot more. He's probably adjusted to a lot more. He's going to be a good quarterback in the NFL, more than likely. And so you would expect that later on in the year, the disguise thing, you maybe got to be a little bit more creative. But for New Orleans, the more static they can look pre-snap with each of their individual looks, right? Like, their base look is going to be different, from which would be 4 down linemen, 3 linebackers, and then 4 players in their secondary, versus their nickel look, where you swap out a linebacker, add an extra defensive back to you. You got 5 of them things on the field. Maybe you look at the dime sets, where you get a 6th defensive back on the field. You swap out a defensive lineman that way, so you've got 3 defensive linemen, 2 linebackers, and then 6 defensive backs. Whatever your set is, whatever your personnel set is, your front, your formation should look the same. So whenever you got 3 down linemen, 2 linebackers, 6 DBs, before the snap, there's a look. And every time that you get that combination of players, it's that look. And then you rotate out of that look post-snap. So you're making him read, adjust after the snap as well. Those are going to be the things that can kind of, what's the phrase I want to use? Throw him for a loop, I guess. But those are the things that you're going to want to try to, it feels like a phrase that like hasn't been uttered since the 20s. Throw him for a loop, Johnny. And so it's those types of things that are going to end up taking advantage of his youth, right? So that's what you want to do. No pun intended on his last name being Young there. Mush rush is an option, right? Mush rush is when you don't over pursue on the ends, in particular, where you're trying to rush and get after the quarterback, but you don't want to give up the escape lanes. The Saints did a really good job of that last week against Ryan Tannehill. They didn't give him a lot of escape options. Not that he's as athletic at all as Bryce Young, but the Saints have to continue that type of discipline in this game. And so I think that that's going to be a big piece of mitigating or neutralizing Bryce Young a little bit, is don't let his legs get too involved. 62% of the time when Carolina used motion last week, it was a passing play. Now, they didn't have DJ Chark out on the field last week. They might have DJ Chark out on the field this week. DJ Chark is probably the guy on that offense that is most number 1-ish, but he's not a DJ Moore. Can the New Orleans Saints keep DJ Chark from becoming DJ Moore, who was always good for a deep shot against the New Orleans Saints every single time that guy met this defense? Carolina only threw 2 passes over 20 yards or over 20 air yards last week. They didn't complete either one of them. Keep it that way. Keep it that way. Don't give up the big play. The New Orleans Saints, on the other hand, by the way, 9 shots deep, 20 yards down the field, completed 3 of them. Pretty good day in terms of that. Like 33%, a third of those is about what you're looking for to complete. That's a good completion percentage there. So as long as you're not turning the ball over in the process, which the Saints didn't on those opportunities. And so I think they did. They had the 1 interception to the Juwan Johnson pass in the 2-minute warning, or the 2-minute drill. But I think that's the next piece that you kind of look to remove or keep removed from their game is don't give up the deep pass. So this is where guys like Marcus May, Tyrann Mathieu, Marshall Lattimore, Paul Sidibe, Taylor, that's where they become super, super, super important. And in getting pressure on the quarterback is the next piece. So while you might be mush rushing, trying not to open up the run lanes, on the interior, push, get in his grill so that you're making him having to throw up. You make not literally vomit, but like throw the trajectories higher, gives your defensive backs the opportunity to get underneath those passes, get your hands up, maybe knock down some passes or tip some passes that get beyond the line of scrimmage, maybe give your linebackers in the second level a shot, all these other things. The next thing is going to be stymieing the run game. Over 150 rushing yards for this Carolina Panthers offense last week. Don't let them do that. Don't let them do that. Last week, they did it against Ryan Nielsen, who helped to make the New Orleans Saints defense and run defense really, really good. Really, really good. Like since 2017, when he showed up with the exception of last year, they were a top 5 run defense, top 3 oftentimes. And so they got a lot of rushing yards against that Atlanta Falcons defense, which is a solid front and a very good defensive coordinator and defensive coach in Ryan Nielsen. So since they had a ton of, and the thing that was tricky about that, and that is maybe tricky about it for the New Orleans Saints, is that they had most of their success running right up the middle, right over the center, like right up the middle. And that's where the New Orleans Saints just rebuilt their defensive line. So guys like Colin Saunders and Nathan Shepard and Malcolm Roach and Brian Brzee and at times Tana Passanio, like those guys are going to be tested quite a bit in this game. Don't give up that run game at the clip that you gave it up against the Tennessee Titans, because Carolina might not bail on it as quickly as Tennessee did inexplicably. But if the offense is doing all the things that we discussed earlier, then you help to mitigate the opportunity for Carolina to utilize the run game because they're playing from behind. That's the big thing for New Orleans, is simply score touchdowns, not field goals. And then finally, Bryce Young had a 53.2 passer rating against man coverage and completed just 44% of his passes against man coverage. So look, the New Orleans Saints are a press man team. That's a good quarterback to go up against in this situation. Those are good quarterback stats to go up against in this situation. So keep the throwing lanes tight, keep the windows closed, keep everything close, and make, guys like Terrace Marshall, who was just like giving up on routes last week, make him beat you, right? Make guys like Adam Thielen try to be the number 1 guy. Keep DJ Chark from becoming a number 1 guy. All these other things. Like, these wide receivers are not the weapons that you want for a Bryce Young, but don't let them turn into the weapons you want for a Bryce Young as well, if that makes sense. So keep those windows tight, because that mitigates a little bit of that passing game away from Bryce Young. And then when he's got to bail, make sure you have the opportunity to be able to stop him, whether it's closing those run lanes or having that spy, right? Pete Werner is very good in this situation. Maximize him in that way. If the New Orleans Saints do just all of that, no big deal. It should be an easy win against the Carolina Panthers. But look, like I said in the crossover episode, this should be a game that the New Orleans Saints win. This should be an easier win for them than last week's game against the Tennessee Titans, but it's a division game. You never know what's going to happen. So it's going to be a lot of fun. That much we know. Enjoy a weekend of NFL football and college football, a stress-free one, until Monday, where the stress is back, the way that we love it. But I will be back as well later on tonight. We've got our live show recapping practice. And then Saturday afternoon after practice, I'll do another show for you. Yeah, we got a Saturday show coming. And I'm thinking I might try something a little new Saturday morning. We'll see about it. We'll see about it. I want to take the in case you missed it concept that we used to do on Fridays in the off season. Maybe do like a little bit of a in case you missed it for the entire week every Saturday. We'll try it out. See if y'all like it. Y'all will let me know. So as always, I appreciate y'all so much for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day, every day. All you everydayers out there, thank you very much for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust you, that nation, I'll holla at you.